I've taught in prisons now for 32 years. It's incredible the degree to which when they experience the real thing, love, it scares them to death. It's alien. They have little sense of what to do with it, because it's not something to manipulate. It's not something to instrumentalize. It's not something just take advantage of for short-term gain. But that's what they're told over and over again. Life is about what? It's about instrumental thinking. It's about market calculation. It's about status, about power, it's about wealth, it's about visibility. No, it's about integrity. Did you say cupidity? No, integrity. It's about honesty. It's about decency. It's about a quest for virtue. Think of Dorothy Day. Think of Du Bois's questions. How does integrity face oppression? Look at her life and see. How does honesty face deception, lies, mendacity, especially from powers that be, given the wickedness in high places? Look at her life in the movement represented by this very institution. How does decency respond to insult? You could write a whole history of all the trashing of the Catholic worker movement and of Dorothy Day. It's a powerful moment in her diary, The Duty of Delight. We thank Brother Robert Ellsberg for editing that magnificent text. She says everything around her is full of hate. I don't know what to do. I'm in despair. I'm wrestling with darkness. I feel like Jacob in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. I'm wrestling with the angel of death against the backdrop, the catastrophic backdrop of the midnight hour. And I am wounded. And I emerge with a new name from Jacob to Israel, which means what? God wrestler. And I'll be a wrestler till the day I die. But in the end, love will have the last word for Dorothy Day, because she was in fact a woman, not just of faith. She was a sister of what we in the Black Baptist tradition call thick faith. We got a whole lot of folk in the pew that got faith, but I'm talking about the ones that got that thick faith, the ones that go all the way down. Dorothy Day reminds me in so many ways of Toni Morrison. You know, Toni Morrison's Catholic. A lot of people don't realize that. She's one of the great Catholic writers like Flannery O'Connor. She has an incarnational conception of human existence. We Protestants are too individualistic. I think we need to learn from Catholics. Always centered on community. And when Dorothy Day talks about the long loneliness, when Dorothy Day talks about the darkness, when Dorothy Day talks about wrestling in the darkness like Jacob, she knows the only thing that can break is a love that overflows into community. It's got to be incarnational. And yes, the Eucharist is transubstantiation in the sense that it reflects a degree to which a miracle can take place, a mystery can be enacted in which our egos, our narcissism can be connected to something positive called a beloved community, a kingdom of God that can lure us out of our fallenness and fallitude into something that constitutes a force for good, as long as we're courageous enough to choose to stay on that tightrope. And we fall on our faces continually, over and over again. But we don't trump each other's possibilities, which means we can love our enemies. Because no matter what our enemies are doing at the moment, their deeds does not fully define their humanity. They can change in the same way you have changed in your own lives, and you don't want to be frozen in any particular moment that definitively defines you. I mean, as a Black Baptist, I know I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and the best I'll ever be is a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities. And gangster memories. And hence the need for grace to fall back on something that can sustain me. Dorothy Day had that kind of thick faith. And that's what allowed her to straighten her back up. Go to jail and wrestle with that solitary confinement those 10 days. You get a chance to read that section, jail in the long loneliness. My God. It's not just about the melancholic. It's not just about the futility of life. It's about the sheer absurdity of life. What do you do in the face of the sheer absurdity of life when you're not even concerned about being a hero anymore? You dealing with something so arbitrary, so contingent, there's nothing to bounce off against your agency. That's the absurd. She understood it. When a faith, a religious faith, in her case a Christian faith, confronts that level, that's what Kierkegaard is, that's what Dostoevsky is. That's what Coltrane was after his 10 years of the heroin addict. That's what Mary Lou Williams was when she converted to Catholicism after her secular years as a jazz musician, owing to Brother Barry Ulanoff, our dear Jewish brother, literary critic who became a Catholic as well, who was close to Mary Lou Williams, influenced by Dorothy Day, enabling a bringing together of that deep spiritual wrestling with radical political engagement. Well, how do we then appropriate critically Dorothy Day in the spirit of Dorothy Day? Well, the first thing we need to do is we have to accent a rare virtue these days, which is courage to tell the truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. But telling the truth does not pay in a market-driven society. You have to pay a cost. And that cost cannot be measured in terms of the society in which we live or even the world that we inhabit. And so we end up with what? We have a whole culture. I hear this all the time, especially my young brothers and sisters of all colors. Oh, I just want to be smart. I just want to be smart. No, let the phones be smart. You be wise. Oh, he's so smart. You see that in the New York Times more and more. Oh, this is a smart book. This is smart. It says nothing. You think Kafka was a smart short story writer? You think Chekhov's plays, somebody said, oh, Three Sisters, that's a smart play. Please. It shows how spiritually empty. Smart has to do with access, manipulation of information and data. It has to do with being smart alecky. They get a certain attention. It has to do usually with connecting smartness to big dollars, so that the hedge fund folk are so smart. Well, what does that make Dorothy Day then? Broke as the 10 Commandments financially. Spiritually as rich as one could ever imagine. She was wise and courageous. How do we do that today? By example. In the same way she did, by example. Tell the truth about the new Jim Crow. I know we got a black president. That's a beautiful thing. It just shows that our white brothers and sisters are less racist than their parents or grandparents. That's beautiful, but that's not worth breakdancing over. So, oh, Brother West, that's progress. Absolutely, that is progress. Brother Malcolm used to say, what, you don't stab folk in the back 9 inches, pull it out 6 inches, and celebrate your progress. No. You got black faces in the White House, but my God, in the basement of the American empire. Start with the reservations, then go to poor white brothers and sisters in Appalachia, then go to the working class with stagnating wages, then go to the brown folk wrestling with massive unemployment, then get to the black hood, and of course black folk, we tend to be the litmus test Not because we have any kind of monopoly on truth, goodness, or beauty, but because the legacy of white supremacy is such that it constitutes a major form of social death in the shaping of the culture, the imagination, and the economy of the United States. So when you keep track of how Sister Letitia and Brother Jamal are doing on the block, that ought to be the focus as opposed to Brother Barack in the White House. Oh my God, let's celebrate. No, Dorothy Day would say, Brother West, are you in any way committed to what I was committed to? Because if I was still going 33 years later, I'd be trying to tell the truth about stop and frisk. I'd be telling the truth about the rule of big money. I'd be telling the truth about why it is we have a criminal justice system that itself cannot manage to put one Wall Street executive to jail, to send to jail after massive criminality, insider trading, market manipulation, fraudulent accounting across the board. And when they get caught, what do? Market calculation. How much money do you want? 13 billion, JP Morgan. Okay, we got a tax write-off. Not one taking personal responsibility. And yet this is the same ruling class with major ideologues representing its interests that say to poor people, when you make bad choices, you must have personal responsibility. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. We don't believe in somehow reaching out to give you bailouts, and yet when they get in trouble, $787 billion and $85 billion every month for over 2.5 years with the Federal Reserve System. And we wonder how it is and why it is that we're wrestling with such cultural decay in terms of the forms of soulcraft, especially among our young people. What forms of life dominate their world? Wu-Tang put it well. Cream. Cash rules everything around me. But it doesn't have to rule me. I can choose to be different. I can choose to cut against the grain. Dorothy Day chose to cut against the grain. Sister Dorothy, what else could we learn from you? Well, you've got to connect the spiritual to the social, the existential to the economic, and the personal to the political. Because if you're going to be a long-distance runner against the American imperial forces, you have got to be so well equipped if you're going to survive. You've got to be your soul intact. You're going to need such spiritual resources so that you don't end up selling out or caving in or giving up. And Dorothy Day is like Malcolm X and Fannie Lou Hamer. She never sold out. She held on to her integrity until the very end. That's a rare thing. Her generation, this generation. She never gave up. She wrestled with nihilism. She wrestled with melancholy. She wrestled with despair and darkness and bleakness. But she allowed the love and community to have the last words. And the challenge is, how do we talk publicly about that kind of love and that sense of community with a radical analysis that goes far beyond the political spectrum? We've got corporate media now with Fox, with cold-hearted right-wing Republican Party policies, and MSNBC with milquetoast, spineless, neoliberal Democratic Party policy. And that's the choice. The right and the left. No. Far right and right. We haven't even got to the center yet, hardly. That's how far things have moved in a conservative way from even the time of Dorothy Day. That's why her spirit is so radically needed, and that's why we're here today to ensure, to let the world know, Sister Dorothy, we love you. Sister Dorothy, we will never, ever forget you. Sister Dorothy, your conception of piety, which is tied to remembrance of those love warriors of the past who revered something bigger than themselves, in her